Questions to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said he would consider Labor's plan to make superannuation fair and sustainable. So, in the same constructive vein, will the Prime Minister consider Labor's plan to make multinational corporations pay their fair share of taxation in Australia?
Member for Deakin.
A plan that will improve the budget bottom line by at least $7 billion over the next decade.
Members on my right will. I haven't called the Treasurer. Members on my right will cease interjecting. It was difficult to hear that question. The Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister. I note the plan of those opposite, and I note the fact that they believe that they will raise some, I think, $1.6 billion or thereabouts in revenue from that particular initiative relating to the thin capitalisation rates. But what those opposite don't understand, or maybe they do and they've just decided to ignore it, is that the type of model that they have put forward is out of step with the OECD rules that were brought down just within the last week. And I'll tell you why. Because what they don't do, what this doesn't do, is it doesn't focus on the bespoke nature of the investments and the legitimate nature of the company operations here in Australia. What those opposite want to do when it comes to multinational taxation arrangements is take a blunt instrument to a very sensitive area. And what they particularly don't understand is if you use the ratios that they want to apply to these issues, then they will be putting at risk serious infrastructure investment in this country because you will be applying a higher interest cost than you otherwise would, Mr. Speaker. So those opposite want to put at risk the pension fund investments of other countries who want to invest in an infrastructure in this country because they want to use a blunt instrument to just grab revenue. But, Mr. Speaker, what they don't understand is what the impact of that might be on what the operations of these companies are. Now, the advice that the government has is the proposals put forward by those opposite will cost investment and they will cost jobs. Now, the approach that the government has taken on this issue is entirely consistent with the OECD approach, and in fact, in many ways, and I pay tribute to the member for North Sydney, it is ahead of the curve when it comes to dealing with multinational taxation arrangements, and it will raise real revenue. And the measures that were introduced to this parliament by the member for North Sydney has already seen the Australian Taxation Office increase the number of firms it's working with from 30 to 80. So what you have on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to multinational taxation is actually a plan that will work. And a plan, Mr. Speaker, that will launch. Now, what we have from those opposite, and we know from those opposite in their time in government, was their absolutely relentless ability to fail to launch on pretty much every issue. They would have ideas, Mr. Speaker, but we remember the pink bats, we remember the school halls, we remember the border protection failures, we remember, Mr. Speaker, that they always would just fail to launch. And in fact, with Labor governments, Mr. Speaker, you're much better off if they just do nothing, because it's when they actually do something, Mr. Speaker, that the damage is really done, because they cannot respect the principle of do no harm. And the measures they're putting forward in this area, Mr. Speaker, which they refuse to provide the assumptions behind, they refuse, despite our request to do that, run the very real risk of putting at jeopardy investment in serious infrastructure projects in this country, because they are trying to use a blunt instrument with the global ratio rule, which does not provide the level of customisation that you need to look at individual circumstances.